I truly believe that about 60% of the population, maybe 70% of the population, is walking around at a 6 out of 10. And we've just accepted this. I don't sleep very well. I wake up sore and achy in the morning, like I had a workout the night before when I haven't. Soles of my feet and ankles are sore and tender when I get out of bed. I have afternoon energy slumps. I retain water. I have a poor response to exercise. All of these things that we just learn to live with and cope with are the consequences of nutrient deficiencies.
Welcome back to Brave New World, the Standards podcast where we explore the cutting edge of science, medicine, and the future of humankind. I'm your host, Evgeny Lebedev, and in this series, we're venturing into the realms of neuroscience, longevity, consciousness, and the extraordinary breakthroughs reshaping the human experience. Today's guest is Gary Brecka, human biologist, biohacker, the founder of The Ultimate Human, a platform blending genetics, biomarkers, breathwork, and lifestyle interventions to help people unlock peak performance, slow aging, and live more vibrant lives. From high-profile athletes and entrepreneurs to everyday people seeking better health, Gary has built a reputation as both mythbuster and provocateur in the longevity space. Mr. Gary Brecka, I'm super excited to have you on Brave New World. Welcome.
I'm really excited to be here. And we actually got a break in the weather for London.
I know. London looks great.
By the end of the podcast, it'll be rainy and cold and overcast. So.
Probably, but let's enjoy it while we have it.
Yeah.
We were just talking briefly before we started recording about how your movement is growing and how exciting it all is that people are really starting to understand what it is, the message you're trying to deliver. Will you just tell our listeners a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, by way of background, I'm a human biologist. My undergraduate degrees are in biology. My postgraduate degrees are in human biology. But for 22 years, I was a mortality expert for large life insurance, which meant that if we got 10 years of medical records on you and 10 years of demographic data, we could tell the insurance company how long you had to live to the month. And it's funny because I get a lot of flack for that, but it's some of the most accurate science in the world. When you have a database with 371 million lives and you know the day, the date, the time, the location, and the cause of death, you can triangulate that back into the record and you can look for the patterns in big data that were leading to extended mortality or to early mortality. And the fascinating thing is that the vast majority of people are not living longer, healthier, happier, more fulfilling lives because of what we called in the research community, we called it modifiable risk factors. And a modifiable risk factor are things like dietary and lifestyle changes that could add a dramatic extension to your life, not just your lifespan, but your health span. And so about 11 years ago, I abruptly resigned from that industry because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life predicting death. And decided I wanted to spend the rest of my life teaching people how to live healthier, happier, longer, more fulfilling lives.
What was it that made you change?
It's interesting. I rarely tell this story, but it was a very specific case. We had access to, if you were applying for a large life insurance policy, and I worked in the jumbo life area, which was $10 million usually and above. We could see everything about your life. We could see your trust accounts. We could see your divorce decrees. We could see your bank accounts, brokerage accounts. We could see all of your medical records. But I was not allowed to have any contact with the patient or any contact with the treating physician. Even if I saw life-threatening drug interactions, I couldn't pick up the phone and warn the patient. I couldn't pick up the phone and call the doctor. And I really felt like I was sitting behind a thick glass wall, just sort of watching blind people walk into traffic. That's the best summation that I could give. And I just sat at my desk one day and said, what am I doing? Why am I spending this time predicting death when I have so much information on how to extend life? And so I left and with my wife, Sage, started a functional medicine clinic. And I'm not a doctor. I'm not a physician. I'm not licensed to practice medicine. So we found a physician and we started a really small clinic in it was a bankrupt vitamin shop. We located in this little strip mall and, the business just exploded. It became one of the largest functional medicine clinics in the world. We recently exited that, and I began a messaging platform, a media platform called The Ultimate Human, to just get the information out. I felt like, and I still feel like, the information doesn't belong to me. It really belongs to humanity. I'm just sort of blessed enough to have it flow through me. And we started a messaging platform, and it's become one of the largest media platforms in the world for wellness and longevity.
And you really can see it growing.
Oh my gosh. I mean, in such a parabolic way. 2 years ago, we would get 2 or 3 million views a month across all of our platforms. I think this past month we got close to 209 million views.
Amazing.
So the content's just being consumed because people are just thirsty for information. They want to understand why they feel the way that they feel. So many people are walking around and, they have brain fog or weight gain or water retention or poor focus and concentration, or they have no libido, or and a very poor response to exercise, and they think that it's a consequence of aging, and it's not. It's a consequence of missing raw material. It's fascinating how we believe this in plant physiology. We seem to not believe it in human physiology. If you had a leaf rotting in any one of these trees out here, and you called a true arborist, like a true botanist, out to look at this tree, they wouldn't even touch the leaf, right? They would core test the soil, and they would say, there's no nitrogen in this soil. And they would add nitrogen to the soil and the leaf would heal. Human beings are no different. When you deprive the human body of certain raw material, and by raw material, I mean simple things, vitamins, minerals, amino acids, you get the expression of disease. And there's so many fallacies in modern medicine that we've just accepted from our authorities, like, that chemicals and synthetics and pharmaceuticals are the answers to nutrient deficiencies in human beings. And, nothing could be further from the truth. If I was to actually blow up a chart of your cellular biology right now, you'd see this really complicated maze of a massive amount of transactions going on inside of 300 billion cells in your body every day. And if you really investigated that chart, the vast majority of your listeners would recognize everything on that chart. They would be simple minerals, vitamins, amino acids. And as you start to pull those out of that chart, as you start to deplete the body of those nutrients, you start to get the expression of disease. People's sleep patterns get interrupted. They wake up more tired than they went to bed. They'll lay down to go to sleep at night, and as their environment quiets, their mind will wake up. So they'll lay in bed, body tired, but mind awake.
Well, I'd love to run through the different aspects that people can improve in their lives, but it's quite a journey you've had. And I just, when you were telling me the story of your journey, I was curious, what does that database or does that insurance company get ever applied to science? Or
That's a really, really good question, and the answer, sadly, is no. I used to say all the time, I still do, if that database could see the light of day, it would permanently change the face of humanity. It would upend modern medicine in a way that would be catastrophic, because we've developed so many fallacies in modern medicine that have just become mainstream thought. For example, that what goes into your body and my body and everybody listening to this podcast's body is treated exactly the same way. And nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah.
We've developed these summaries of things like genetically inherited disease. So, there's people listening to this podcast right now that have high blood pressure. They've been diagnosed with hypertension or type 2 diabetes or hypothyroid or any number of other conditions. And they've been told that we don't know the source or the origin of why you have this condition. But when we look at your family history, your mom's sister had it. Oh, and your father's brother had it. So you have familial hypertension or familial type 2 diabetes, or you have genetically inherited hypothyroid. And none of that is true. If you actually were told that you have high blood pressure, for example, because your father or your uncle had it, and you just took that one step further and looked your doctor in the face and said, okay, well, what gene did I inherit from my ancestor that caused this condition to exist? Their face would go blank, because that gene does not exist. And which means that disease does not exist. And it's a really hard thing for people to grasp, but They go, well, I do have high blood pressure. And the vast majority of these conditions, autoimmune, for example, Crohn's disease, Hashimoto's, Sjogren's, multiple sclerosis, they are idiopathic. They're of unknown origin. And yet, even though we don't know the origin, we still medicate perfectly healthy organs for crimes they're not committing. So many people are walking around on blood pressure medication, for example, and they're taking blood pressure medication because they have high blood pressure, but they've been told they inherited this condition, which is patently false. The human genome, with very few exceptions, is specifically designed to not pass on disease. I mean, most of us would not be here right now if the genome was really good at carrying and translating disease. It's not. It's actually very good at stopping the translation of disease.
But there are some genes that...
There are some genes. Like BRCA gene, for example, is a legitimate predisposition to breast cancer. Most of the genetically inherited diseases are extraordinarily rare. The vast majority of them are predispositions to conditions. And so the question is, what predisposes me? What does this gene do that predisposes me to a chronic illness? And the answer to that question in the vast majority of cases is it exposes you to a nutrient deficiency. I'll give you a perfect example. The most common gene mutation in the world is called MTHFR. It's affectionately called the motherfucker gene. Can I say motherfucker on the podcast?
Yes.
Are we going to have to cut that out?
We sure can.
It stands for methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase, but it's the MTHFR gene. So about 46% of the population has this gene mutation. And what this gene does is it impairs or inhibits the ability for the body to take folic acid and folate and convert it into the form the body can use, called methylfolate. Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal until you realize that folic acid is the most prevalent nutrient in the human diet. So if you have a gene mutation, which nearly half the population has, and you don't know.
And you have it, I believe.
I do have it. Yeah. I'm a motherfucker. Yes. I come from a long line of motherfuckers. So you inherit this gene from your ancestor. It is not a gene that passes disease. It's a gene that passes a deficiency. And so you have a deficiency in something called methylfolate. And this deficiency will express itself a number of ways. First of all, you will have very, very poor gut motility. And this is the most overlooked thing in all of bariatric medicine. It is the pace of the gut. So we have to start thinking about our intestinal tract as a 30-foot-long conveyor belt, right? And we put contents on it at one end as they exit the stomach, and 30 feet later, they're going to exit the rectum. And as it moves along this conveyor belt, there's a very specific sequence of transactions that occur. If you do nothing other than change the speed of that conveyor belt, you get everything from gas to bloating to diarrhea to constipation to irritability to cramping, unrelated to what you're eating, unrelated to your gut microbiome. And these people, if you're listening to this podcast right now and you're one of those people that has these intermittent gut issues, constipation sometimes, bloating sometimes, pain and cramping, and you ate the same thing on Monday, and you were fine, and you ate the exact same thing on Wednesday, and you blew up like a tick, you'll go down the road of food allergy testing and food sensitivity testing and gut microbiome testing, but not thinking about the actual pace of the gut. And so this gene mutation significantly impairs the pace of the gut. By the way, it's very, very easy to fix. It's the worst gene mutation to have, but the easiest gene mutation to fix. By supplementing with something called methylfolate, you return the gut motility to normal. And when you look at the link between gut microbiome and the gut health, you can extrapolate that into just about every form of mental illness, of every form of mood disorder. So, for example, we've had almost 250,000 patients come through our clinic system. I never once, not once, saw someone who suffered from anxiety who did not also have fairly severe gut issues. So people that have anxiety,
it's interesting,
in almost 100% of the cases, will complain of gut issues, the gas, the bloating, the diarrhea, the constipation, the cramping, the irritability. And these are linked because the deficiency in methylfolate, which impairs your gut motility, is the same nutrient that helps your body break down a class of neurotransmitters called catecholamines. And the reason why that's important is because when people suffer from anxiety, they'll have common characteristics, generally 3 characteristics in common. If you ask them, have you had this on and off throughout your entire lifetime?
Yes.
They'll say yes. There's your first sign that it's linked to this gene. If you ask them, can you point to the specific trigger that causes it? They'll say no. Sometimes I could be sitting on a podcast, or I could be at dinner with friends, or I could be at my house eating dinner with my spouse, and all of a sudden I'm overwhelmed with anxiety. And then if you ask them the third question, if you've tried anti-anxiety medication, did they work? They'll say no. It made me feel like a zombie. And so what you're talking about here is an inability to control the level of fight or flight neurotransmitters in the body. So if you walked out of this podcast right now and you stepped out on the street and somebody was standing in front of you with a knife, very real threat, right? Your pupils would dilate, your heart rate would increase, your extremities would flood with blood. That's called a fight or flight reaction. What caused that to occur? What caused that transaction to occur was your brain flooded with something called catecholamines. Well, you could also be laying in your bed tonight in London, and you could just start thinking about getting eaten by a shark. And just the thought of getting eaten by a shark, and you could probably reason to yourself that the chances of a shark getting out of that ocean and making it into your hotel room, up the elevator, and biting you in bed.
Well, the brain doesn't know the difference, right?
The brain does not know the difference. That's an excellent point. So neurophysiologically, they're the same thing. So people suffer their entire lifetime with this because they have a nutrient deficiency in something called methylfolate, which impairs the motility of the gut. It impairs the ability for the body to break down neurotransmitters. And now you've been diagnosed with something like irritable bowel syndrome or diverticulitis or ulcerative colitis, or further down the road, Crohn's disease. You've been told that you have generalized anxiety, generalized depression, a mood disorder, a mental illness. But the truth is you have a nutrient deficiency.
How would that process work if you didn't have a nutrient deficiency in terms of anxiety? If, say, you are laying in bed and you're imagining a shark's going to come up the elevator and eat you, what would be the process if it was working correctly?
If it was working correctly, your catecholamines would rise to a level of a 2, not to a level of a 10. And so if you look at this rise in these neurotransmitters, so at a 1 or a 2, you feel mildly anxious. At a 4 or 5, you start to feel anxiety. At a 6 or a 7, you can have a full-blown panic attack. It can actually affect your heart rate and make you tachycardic. If it rises even further, you can have full-blown paranoias. So if I had a syringe, a magic syringe full of catecholamines, which are norepinephrine, epinephrine, ephedrine, dopamine, and I injected it into your arm, you would instantly begin to have a fight or flight response, whether or not there was the presence of a fear. And people that suffer from true anxiety will tell you, I don't need to be afraid of heights and walk to the edge of a 30th floor balcony. I don't need to be claustrophobic and get on a crowded elevator. I can be in a very normal environment and I can be overwhelmed with anxiety. And I could go on and on and on and on about the types of things that people suffer from that they believe are genetically inherited disease, that they believe are a consequence of their environment or a consequence of aging, and they're not.
Presumably, you would agree that there are certain people, like myself, for example. When I was 4 months old, I was given buckwheat to eat, and it was a bit too early for me to eat buckwheat. So I had an intestinal intersection operation at 4 months, and I spent a number of weeks in the hospital because it was Soviet hospital. It was much less compassionate. And
you had to do your own surgery?
Well, pretty much, yeah. Or a little less was known about child psychology. So my mother was very rarely allowed to see me. I think in the first days she wasn't allowed to see me at all, and then in the weeks that followed, she saw me just a few hours a day. And so in that, presumably at that age, you are given soothing techniques where where you develop and they are able to self-soothe. And if you are not able to, you might later on in life be your ability to deal with certain things might be weakened as a result of that. So.
Well, let's walk through that. I mean, the first thing you pointed out to me was that you had, a gut operation. Yeah. Right. So how is the gut related to mental illness, mood disorders?
Very much. We know that.
Very much. I mean, we know, for example, that 90% of the serotonin in our body is right here. It's in our gut. So if you don't have it here, you can't have it here. And so rarely do mental illnesses and mood disorders begin in the outside environment. they begin in the inside environment. These are not things that happen to you. They're things that happen within you. And by that, I mean that if you impair the ability for the body to make the neurotransmitter serotonin, which, by the way, the factory that makes serotonin in the gut takes an amino acid called tryptophan, and it methylates it into the neurotransmitter serotonin. Then serotonin travels up the vagus nerve, and you have mood. That's the main driver of mood. The main driver of behavior is dopamine, right? Which is also, among other places, methylated in the gut. We take phenylalanine and tyrosine, and we turn it into the neurotransmitter dopamine. So if you have impaired dopamine synthesis, you now have a mood disorder, because this is the main driver of behavior.
Yes.
We used to have a saying in the mortality space: the absence of dopamine is the presence of addiction. We defined for decades low serotonin. It was called the serotonin hypothesis of depression. Low serotonin was the presence of depression. But the fascinating thing is, if we define depression as low serotonin, why would we not treat it by raising serotonin? And that's not what we do. We take people that are low on serotonin, we put them on something called an SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And what this does is it just rations what little serotonin you have. It blocks the uptake of serotonin. So it takes the little serotonin you have and it keeps it from going off a cliff. Well, by definition, that never raises serotonin. So by definition, it never ends depression. I can't tell you how many people have sat across from me like this. And said, I've been on an antidepressant for 12 years.
I think we're now beginning to understand that that's not the main pathway for depression. But there are, in my view anyway, there are external things from childhood conditioning and possibly parents, maybe not even genes, but maybe epigenes, that would affect how one can deal with certain situations in life.
There are definitely locked traumas, right? And we have something called trauma bonding, where we bond to old traumas and we develop defense mechanisms around that. And sadly, most of what modern society has to offer for people in that position is coping mechanisms. We teach you to cope, but that's like just teaching you to carry a heavy backpack around and just become stronger. I mean, why not teach us to take the backpack off? And so the very first thing that we should do in any of these cases, we should see, does this human have the raw material it needs to do its job? And there's a test you can do called a genetic methylation test. I've dedicated the balance of my adult lifetime to the study of methylation, because I think it is the one test that every person should do once in their lifetime. And essentially what it is, you put a cheek swab in your mouth and you swab the inside of your cheek, you send it to a lab, it comes back, and it tells you exactly what genes are impaired. And while you can't fix the gene, you can supplement for its deficiency. So if you have the MTHFR gene mutation, which roughly half the population has, you can't convert folate and folic acid into methylfolate. There will never be a time that you're capable of doing that. So you have to supplement with methylfolate.
And that leads to high homocysteine.
It leads to high homocysteine, which is one of the leading causes of high blood pressure, because homocysteine is an amino acid that's in the blood. It's in the blood of everybody listening to this podcast. If you inherited an inability to break down homocysteine, you end up with hypertension. And you're told that you inherited the disease, hypertension, but you inherited the deficiency in methylfolate. It's an important distinction, because the deficiency in methylfolate can be fixed. In fact, the US FDA 4 days ago now, just approved the first prescription strength methylfolate called folinic acid to treat autism and behavioral disorders. And so the worst thing you can do is get online and start Googling around about what is a good supplement: resveratrol, CoQ10, St. John's wort, ashwagandha, NMN, NAD, nicotinamide riboside. They're all amazing. But the question is, what does your body need? So we need data. We need to know what raw material is missing in my body. How do I find the nitrogen missing in my soil? And, I truly believe that about 60% of the population, maybe 70% of the population, is walking around at a 6 out of 10. And we've just accepted this. I don't sleep very well. I wake up sore and achy in the morning, like I had a workout the night before when I haven't. Soles of my feet and ankles are sore and tender when I get out of bed. I have afternoon energy slumps. I retain water. I have a poor response to exercise. All of these things that we just learn to live with and cope with are the consequences of nutrient deficiencies. Not of your environment, not of your stress, not of your relationship with your spouse, your career. They're consequences of nutrient deficiencies.
My idea was to run through the different areas of how you become the ultimate human.
Okay.
And we've already touched on emotional health. That was one of them. And since we're talking about supplementation, let's do that one. Would you say that everything you supplement for should be tested first? Or certain things like omegas you would just supplement without going overboard?
Yeah, if you did no testing, at a basic minimum, we should be supplementing with a methylated, that word is important, methylated multivitamin. The reason why I use the term methylated is because what these multivitamins will assume is that you can't convert anything. So they will convert it for you. So they will never give you folic acid. They will give you methylfolate. They won't give you cyanocobalamin, a form of B12. They'll give you methylcobalamin. And they'll give you the complex of B vitamins. So a methylated multivitamin is an excellent basic place to start because that will fill in the gaps for deficiency. The vast majority of us need to be supplementing with vitamin D3, cholecalciferol, about 5,000 IUs a day, with 80 micrograms of something called K2. D3 needs to be paired with K2 because D3, amongst other things, it acts sometimes like a hormone and acts sometimes like a vitamin. It also is a calcium transport molecule. You want that calcium to deposit into the bone and not the arterial.
Do they need to be paired at the same time?
Paired at the same time, taken in same time. So a methylated multivitamin, a vitamin D3 with K2. I believe that everyone should be taking a mineral salt. I use one called Baja Gold sea salt.
Yes, I got it this weekend.
Oh, you did?
having listened to a few conversations with you, and it's good. It's good.
It's probably my favorite biohack because, a $15 bag of this mineral salt will last you 5 years. And it has all 91 trace minerals. And if you were to look at a soil lineage study done in the 40s or 50s or 60s and compare it to a soil lineage study now, you'd realize how depleted our soil is in minerals. So the animals that eat that soil and the plants that grow in that soil are mineral deficient. And while we used to be able to get the vast majority of our nutrients from food, I think it's consequential for people to supplement for those deficiencies now. But a mineral salt, so in the first thing in the morning, if you woke up and you put some Baja Gold mineral salt in your water, you added something, I use something called perfect aminos, which is all 9 of the essential amino acids. This is another very, very common deficiency because essential means they're necessary for life. Yeah. Okay, so there are 9 essential amino acids. You have to get them from diet or supplementation. When you become a deficient in these amino acids, you impair the body's ability to do all kinds of things, not the least of which is make neurotransmitters. Serotonin methylated from tryptophan, dopamine methylated from tyrosine, and phenylalanine, which are amino acids. A lot of people are aware of the protein equivalent. Like you've probably heard, you need 1 gram of protein for every kilogram of body weight. And they came up with that because you're not trying to get to the protein, you're trying to get to the amino acids. All protein, regardless of its source, becomes exactly the same thing in the human body, whether you eat an egg, a fish, meat, chicken, whether you eat vegan protein, hemp seed, those proteins will be broken down into amino acids. Those amino acids are what build structure in the body. You build muscle from amino acids. You build natural killer cells. You build collagen, elastin, and fibrin. We've been led to believe that you can target direct protein in the human body, which is patently false. Like we don't need our nails to grow our nails. We don't need our hair to grow our hair, but we think we can eat collagen to grow collagen, right? Collagen, if you put it in your coffee, and I'm not having a problem with collagen, but when you put it in your coffee or you take it in a powder, does not become collagen in the body. It becomes amino acids, just like a piece of steak or a piece of chicken or a piece of fish or an egg. It becomes the exact same thing. So if you want to skip that process, you just take all 9 of the essential amino acids. And once you take all 9 of the essential amino acids, the body can build any structure. Muscle, ligament, tendon, natural killer cells, collagen, elastin, fibrin. The body needs vitamins, minerals, and amino acids to do its job.
But I quite like to ask my guests to debunk a couple of old beliefs, and one of them is that salt's bad for you.
Oh my gosh, we've been lied to about salt for decades. If your blood pressure was so high that you called 999, the very first thing they would do when they arrive is they would bag you with sodium. They would take sodium, a solution, 0.9% sodium, sodium chloride, and they would squeeze that into your veins to lower your blood pressure. And, we're not hydrated when we have water in our blood. We're hydrated when we have water in our tissues. And what causes the water to leave the blood and enter the tissue is the sodium gradient. When you're deficient in sodium, you actually are dehydrated. And so there's a really interesting study that was published in the Wiley Journal of Headaches. And this is a journal that's specifically designed for publications around headaches. And it looked at migraine sufferers, about 8,900 migraine sufferers. And people that suffer from migraine headaches, for example, they believe that the pain is coming from their brain. They say, it's behind my eye, it's on the other side of my temple, it's up here under, the occipital region, it's in the back of my head, or it's all over my head. But that's actually not possible because the brain has no pain receptors. So the brain is not capable of sending a pain signal. So the pain is not coming from your brain. So the question is, where is it coming from? It's coming from the covering of the brain. It's called the dura. And it's like a saran wrap that's wrapped over the top of your brain. And the dura is fraught with pain receptors. And the dura hates two things. It hates being stretched and it hates being contracted. And what causes it to stretch or contract is the sodium gradient. You would not believe the number of chronic migraine sufferers that I've been able to put into permanent remission with a mineral salt.
And there's so much to say, but since we have limited time and it's a hugely important aspect in becoming the ultimate human.
Yes.
What would your recommendations
So my
be?
broad advice on nutrition would be to look at the big data, right? Forget dogmatic dieting. If you look at, for example, blue zone data, you see that there's no continuity between diets in the blue zones. If you went to Sardinia, you'd see the highest carbohydrate consumption, one of the longest life expectancies. If you went to the Mediterranean, you would see very high fatty fish and oil. In fact, in the Mediterranean, true Mediterranean diets will consume 2 liters of olive oil per person per week. Any cardiologist would tell you that's a recipe for disaster, yet they're living well beyond age 100. If you went to Singapore, you'd see the highest meat consumption per capita and very long life expectancy. And then the French are kind of screwing up the whole model because they're smoking cigarettes, eating cheese, and drinking wine, and they're living to 100 years old. The continuity between all of those diets was not carnivore, paleo, keto, pescatarian, vegan, vegetarian, raw food. There was no dogmatic diet. It was the absence of processed foods.
Yes.
So there is no replacement for a whole food diet. So before you dogmatically diet, you should make certain that you are eating whole foods. Foods as close to their natural form as possible, which includes meat, fish, chicken, eggs, avocado, coconut oil, olive oil, nuts. And these are foods that the body readily recognizes. We can metabolize them. We can eliminate the waste. What happens is we introduce processed foods, highly processed foods. And this happens in vegan and vegetarianism. It happens in every form of dieting. If you've ever actually looked at the ingredients on a non-burger, for example, it's you can't even pronounce half of those, right? There'll be 30 plus different chemical ingredients, thickening agents, additives, preservatives, what have you. The other interesting thing about blue zones is that there was no non-exchangeable in the diets. What was not exchangeable was the zero presence of processed food. What was not exchangeable was a sense of community and purpose and mobility into later in life. I have a saying that aging is the aggressive pursuit of comfort. The more aggressively we pursue comfort, the faster we age. We regulate our body temperature, we regulate our air temperature, we regulate our lighting, we regulate everything now because we're creatures of comfort.
Yeah.
We kind of have to stop telling grandma not to go outside, it's too hot, not to go outside, it's too cold, just to lay down, to just relax, to eat at the very first pang of hunger. That's destroying your natural defense mechanisms. If you don't load a bone, it doesn't strengthen. If you don't tear a muscle, it doesn't grow. If you don't challenge the immune system, it weakens. Strength is built by challenge, so hormetic stresses in the body are very good for you. Cold water immersion is amazing for you. I'd probably say, if I give your listeners one travel tip that I never hear everyone talking about for some reason, which is pretty astounding to me, is that, the body runs on a 24-hour clock. And without overcomplicating things, there's an area of the brain, it's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. There's an area of the brain that is the master clock. And this 24-hour cycle is very important. When is cortisol rising and when is it falling? When is melatonin rising? When is it falling? When is digestion active? When is it not active? And what happens when we travel is we throw all of these clocks off.
Circadian rhythm. Basically.
Circadian rhythm, Yeah, your circadian rhythm, your biorhythm, your biological clock. So when you travel, you can't control when you sleep and when you wake. You can control when you eat. We are much more tied to our digestive cycle than we are the sleep-wake cycle of the sun. So for example, in Miami, which is where I live on the East Coast, I go to bed at 10 p.m., I get up at 6 a.m. So my body is used to sleeping between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. When I'm traveling, if I eat during 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Eastern time, you're wrecked. You will never adjust to that time zone. So as I travel, I preserve my sleeping window. I don't sleep at the same time, but I eat at the same time. I'm in London. That's 5 hours ahead. So I won't eat before 11 a.m. London time. I'll drink teas. I'll have coffee. I'll take my amino acids, hydrogen, water, and mineral salts, but I won't eat solid food until 11 a.m. And the reason for that is prior to 11 a.m., is 6 a.m. my time. Is prior to 6 a.m. my time. And so even though I can't control when I go to bed and when I wake up, I can control when I feed myself. So it's one less variable the body has to deal with. The next time you travel and switch time zones, take the time zone that you exist in and the sleeping window in that time zone and preserve that sleeping window, meaning don't eat when your body would normally be sleeping. It is a game changer for really good tip of travel. Game changer. And then if you can, expose your eyes to natural sunlight, get outside first thing in the morning within 30 minutes of waking, and just make exercise non-negotiable. And it doesn't have to be complicated. And so you control the variables you can control, and you let go of the variables that you can't control.
What are the other routines? So the cold water immersion,
cold water immersion, or cold shower will suffice too, right? I mean, you don't need a fancy cold plunge. If a cold plunge isn't in your budget, just take Tupperware containers and fill them full of water, put them in your freezer, and freeze them overnight, and then drop these big blocks of ice in your bathtub, and it will last 3 days. Most of us are not using our bathtub every night. It might as well be a cold plunge, and every 3 days you can rotate the water. Very inexpensive way to have a cold plunge in your house if you have a bathtub. If you don't, cold showers are amazing. Most of us don't want to do a cold shower because we don't want to be comfortable, because aging is the aggressive pursuit of comfort. We would much prefer comfort and then the consequences of that versus some mild discomfort and the benefits from that. And so if you have no other access to it other than the morning, then finish your shower, step out of that stream of water, turn the water as cold as it will get, and step back into that stream of water and just deal with it. First start at 30 seconds, work your way up to 3 minutes, and just deal with it. Be uncomfortable for 3 minutes and embrace that. And I promise you'll get out and dry off, and the lights will be on in a way that they may have never been on before. And pretty soon it will become your new addiction, right? It will become your drug of choice because you'll go, wow, when I start my day like that, it's just a completely different morning.
So there's the cold water immersion, the sunlight, which will you just explain briefly what it does to us?
Sure. I mean, natural sunlight is very, very different than artificial light. There are wavelengths of light in natural sunlight that specifically regulate your circadian clock. They not only tell you that it's morning, but they have a demonstrative effect on your cortisol and your melatonin, suppressing melatonin and helping to raise cortisol. Cortisol is a waking hormone. We think as cortisol is always being bad. It's absolutely not bad when it's in the right cycle. It's necessary. When we get burnt out, our cortisol can get near zero. It can get in the very, very low single digits and even in the fractions of a digit. And this is because we're just exhausted. We're used to running on adrenaline and cortisol in a high stress environment. And so returning your sleep-wake cycle, your cortisol melatonin cycle, is highly dependent on natural light. There is nothing that will reset your circadian rhythm better and then getting natural light exposure first thing in the morning, not through a window, not from inside, looking outside, but actually going out in natural light without sunglasses on. If you're one of those people that it's afraid of the sun and doesn't want to burn, the first morning light, the first hour of the day, about 50 minutes of the day, which is called morning light, there is no UVA or UVB rays in that light. So you can't burn. You actually get natural light from the sun, the same light that creates vitamin D3, which is I would argue, the single most important nutrient in the human body. It's actually the only vitamin that human beings make on our own. If I was to draw your blood or the blood of any listener to this podcast, there would be hundreds of vitamins in their bloodstream, but you're only capable of making one, and it's vitamin D3. And so just think how important that vitamin must be to human function if it's the only vitamin we make on our own. It's absolutely critical. So, natural light is phenomenal, but because it's free and it's accessible, we don't really give it the credence it deserves. We become so disconnected from Mother Nature.
That's for sure.
In addition to becoming disconnected from each other, there's a really interesting study that was just completed by Harvard University. It's actually the longest longevity study ever done. So it's almost a 70-year study. And if you boil the outcomes of this study down to just a few sentences, it would be that the quality of your relationships determine the span of your life. And this is not only the quality of the relationship with your spouse, but with your children and with your community. And most of us do not have deep-rooted relationships with our community. I heard somebody say that I'd rather carry 4 quarters than 100 pennies, meaning I'd like to keep my circle small. And have deep relationships, then keep it very broad and have many superficial relationships. And most of us have 100 pennies as relationships. We don't have 4 quarters. We don't have our boys, our girls, and our coworkers are just that, they're coworkers. And the study examined the depth of our relationships, which correlates to the Blue Zone studies. Because if you look at Blue Zones, the sense of community and purpose was an absolute necessity of longevity. So community, purpose, relationships are medicine.
And breath, I think, is the one we haven't touched on, because that's part of your routine.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because here's another one that's absolutely free that has a massive impact on your mental health, your resilience, your body's adaptive responses, and yet we won't take 4 to 8 minutes a day and just do a simple round of breath work. So in the morning, if you did nothing other, get outside, expose your skin and eyes to sunlight, and you did 3 rounds of 5 obnoxiously deep breaths. And when I say obnoxious, I mean obnoxiously deep breaths. You really engage your auxiliary muscles of respiration. And you did 5 obnoxiously deep breaths. And at the end of the 5th breath, you breath held as long as you could. Really resist the urge to breathe. Allow the carbon dioxide to build up, because carbon dioxide is the main vasodilator in the human body. It's not nitric oxide, it's carbon dioxide. Allow your vascular system to dilate, and then take an extremely deep breath in. Hold that as long as you can and let it out. And if you did 3 rounds of that, 3 rounds of 5 breaths, you would not believe how good you would feel. This is what human beings were meant to do. And that will actually turn the lights on, restore your circadian rhythm, regulate your cortisol and melatonin cycle, and ignite your brain.
It's absolutely right. Just a couple very quick fire questions.
Yes.
Which are, what's the one step people could take tomorrow to feel a difference?
I would say of all the things we've talked about on this, hydrate, mineralize, amino acids, and hydrogen gas in the morning. And try breath work. You don't have to be perfect at it. Just get the air in and get the air out. Just those things. Give your body those basic raw materials: oxygen, life, breath, sunlight, and just do it for 7 days. And at the end of 7 days, you will never not do it again. Schedule meetings and travel around sleep and exercise. Put sleep and exercise into your schedule first. Then schedule everything else. Nothing will shift, I promise you. You won't miss a thing.
So what do you think the realistic new upper limit of lifespan can be in the next few years, the next 5-10 years?
Well, I'll tell you a fact. If you're alive in 5 years from today, it will be your choice whether or not you want to live to 120 or 140 years old. That will be your choice. because big data, artificial intelligence, and early detection are convening in a way that is going to upend modern medicine in a way that will be catastrophic to modern medicine in terms of how we extend life, not to how we treat disease onset or trauma, but how we extend life. So 5 years from now, again, will be your choice of whether or not you want to live to 120 or 140 years old.
Amazing. And thank you so much. It was a really, really interesting, fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was amazing, my friend. I'll be back if you'll have me.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really great to talk to Gary. There was a lot of information there. What I take out of it is a reminder of how important it is that we engage with nature, because this is how we used to live, and we completely separated ourselves from it. And things like the 4 things are cold exposure, getting sunshine in the morning, grounding, so walking around barefoot on the ground in the park or in the garden or just outside your house, and also breath, and how important breath and oxygen is for life. So I'm getting back on those things. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.